Jared Dillian. Own your money. Own your life.
I'm Jared Dillian. This is the Jared Dillian Show. We got a good show tonight because we're going to talk about some garbage that's out there that people shouldn't listen to. Some awful, awful advice. So I want to talk, first of all, this is the Jared Dillian Show, and if you want to call in, please call 877-711-5211. That's 877-711-5211. You can also go to jareddillianmoney.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at DailyDirtNam. So let's talk about Mr. Money Mustache, the worst person in the world, who is some guy with a blog that eats no food and lives in a tiny house and says that you should do the same thing. This blog, by the way, is the biggest personal finance blog in the world. And this guy claims, and he's probably not lying, that his website has had 33 million unique visitors. If he wanted to sell it, he could probably make a lot of money. He has a plan for financial independence. And by the way, this is kind of a larger discussion. There's this whole movement. There's a lot of people doing this. This is the worst plan ever. And let me just get some quotes from the Mr. Money Mustache website. And he says, your current middle-class life is an exploding volcano of wastefulness. You should be able to cut your expenses in half or 2/3. As it turns out, spending much less money than you bring in is the only way to get rich. That's a direct quote. I'm actually going to say that again. As it turns out, spending much less money than you bring in is the only way to get rich. So let's examine that statement for a moment. So any household has a budget, and you work at a job and you make money, and you have expenses. You have rent or a mortgage, you have insurance, you have groceries, you have utilities, and you have discretionary spending on clothes and vacations and stuff like that. But like I said, you work at a job and you bring in money. So you basically have revenues and expenses, just like a business. And this guy is saying quite explicitly that the only way to get rich is to focus on the expense side. The only way to get rich, he says, is to focus on the expense side. And he says you can cut your expenses in half or 2/3, which, doesn't sound super realistic, but he, later on in the show, we'll talk about exactly how he does it, and I don't think you're going to like it. This is, I have a completely different philosophy. Cutting expenses is good. You shouldn't spend money on stupid crap. If you're spending money on stupid crap, if you have subscriptions that you're not using, cancel them. If you're, going out to lunch every day, stop. There's just easy ways that you can save money. But that's not how you get rich. How you get rich is the revenue side. How much money you bring in. You see, I used to work on Wall Street, and the funny thing about Wall Street is everybody hates Wall Street. I learned some interesting things at Wall Street. Wall Street, if you work in an investment bank, you're working with, first of all, it's New York, so super expensive rent, super expensive electricity, overhead. It's the most expensive place in the world. They're not cheaping out on that stuff. And the most expensive employees in the world. Everybody makes hundreds of thousands of dollars. Everybody's super highly paid. They don't worry about the expenses. It's all about how much revenue you can bring in. If you're not making enough profits, they will cut occasionally, but really it's about bringing in more revenue. And if you're a business, there's no business out there that it's going to cut its way to profitability. And that's actually, fast forward 12 years from when I was working on Wall Street to Wall Street today, that's exactly what the banks are trying to do. They've lost that mentality, and they're trying to cut their way to profitability. They're shrinking their businesses, thinking that they're going to get richer, and it's not working, and which is obvious to me. I don't know why it's not obvious to them. So not too many people focus on the revenue side. And who focuses on the revenue? So let's talk about a couple of ways. We've talked about this on other shows, but let's talk about a couple ways you could bring in more revenue. You could work another job. You could go back to school, get a degree, get a higher paying job. School is expensive, so why not maybe just focus on getting a higher paying job or working more hours or investing or, there's a lot of ways to do it. And we'll talk about that too. Throughout my whole life, me personally, I'm talking about me, I have always focused on the top line. I have always focused on the revenue side. Go back to when I was 26, 27 years old. In 2001, I was making $55,000 a year. So if when I was 26 and 27 years old, I said to myself, I'm going to get rich by cutting expenses and cutting $5,000 or $10,000 in expenses, what does that accomplish? I save an extra $5,000 or $10,000 a year, which is not much. And now I'm uncomfortable because I'm giving up luxuries and things I need. So basically, I'm just living in deprivation to save an extra $5,000 or $10,000 a year. Thank goodness I didn't do that. What I did was I went to business school and I got an MBA and I worked on the trading floor in San Francisco and I got some experience. And I went from a job paying $55,000 a year to a job paying $135,000 a year. I focused on the revenue side. And I've never been a big spender. I've never been a big spender, and I'm not, it's cutting expenses for me. It's not really an issue. But then, I made a lot of money at that job, and then I started my own business, which has been even more profitable. I've always focused on the revenue side. You cannot, it's just like a business. You cannot cut your way to profitability. So this money mustache dork, okay, he's got, a couple of $1 million in Vanguard index funds. His standard of living has not increased. He lives in a tiny house. He doesn't have a cell phone. He has a crappy car. So this guy tells you to cut expenses, but you cannot cut your way to being rich. Did Jeff Bezos cut his way to being rich? Did Warren Buffett cut his way to being rich? You hear about these every once in a while in the news. You see these news stories about an old lady that nobody's ever heard of. She lives by herself. She's a shut-in, and she dies. And in her will, she donates $8 million to a cat shelter. This is actually pretty common. This is pretty common. Somebody dies with a buttload of money, and they donate it, and you start to I'm happy for the cats, but this is a person who cut expenses, and invested it and got rich. Great, there was a giant number in the bank account, and she never enjoyed any of it. So what was the point? I mean, yeah, like I said, great for the cats, but what's the point? So this is another direct quote from this guy. The bottom line is this: by focusing on happiness itself, you can lead a much better life than those who focus on convenience, luxury, and blah, blah, blah. And he says happiness comes from many sources, but none of those sources involve cars or purses. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what your definition of happiness is. Let me just, I'll just tell you a quick story. I was in Miami 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was shopping for clothes, and I went in the John Bravado store, and I struck up a conversation with the sales girl there. We got along, and she says, "I'll be your personal wardrobe assistant." And basically what they did was they packed up 2 boxes worth of clothes. They mailed them to me. I tried them all on last night. I'm keeping about half of them. I'm sending the other half back, and I'm going to get charged. Can I tell you how much fun that was? That was awesome. You can do that too. We are not going to cut and cut and cut. We're going to cut a little bit. We're going to do a little bit of austerity, but we're going to focus on the top line. We're going to focus on the revenue side. I'm Jared Dillian. This is the Jared Dillian Show.
The Jared Dillian Show.
Hi, this is Jared Dillian. Catch the Jared Dillian Show from 6 to 8 Eastern only on the Smart Talk Radio Network.